You've taken the painkillers, haven't you? So you shouldn't be in pain anymore, right? Then, go ahead and vacuum. My husband's gaze was directed at the package of painkillers I had just swallowed. Just wait a little until the medicine takes effect. I'll get it done properly, I told him, to which he stood up with a conspicuous sigh. I'm not saying I want to switch house chores with him, he could at least wait a bit. As I was trying to hold back my sigh, a strong shock ran through my back. Falling to the floor, I looked up to see my husband, rudely propping one foot up on the back of the sofa. The throbbing pain had me speechless. Could it be that he had just kicked me in the back? My husband laughed coldly at my plight. I don't care about your menstrual cramps appeals, just hurry up and vacuum. My name is Sally, 27 years old. I am an ordinary housewife, living with my husband, Jacob. The story of our encounter goes back to when I joined the company where Jacob was working. After graduating from university, I landed a job in sales. Until I was able to work on my own, Jacob was the one who guided me as my mentor. Jacob was a good-looking guy with short hair, and customers were attracted to his appearance. He also had a way with words that closed deals naturally. In sales, successful people are said to fall into two categories: those with extensive knowledge and information about what they're selling, who can leverage that into their pitch, and those who can make the customers want to sign a contract for them, personally. Jacob was definitely the latter. At first, all I had for Jacob, who was successful in sales, was admiration. But when I failed to secure a contract and was feeling down, Jacob reached out to me. Gradually, I was able to confide in him, and as we went out for meals and spent time together, I began to develop feelings for him. So when we started dating, I was so happy that I cried, and when he proposed, I was so overjoyed that I was literally jumping for joy. Life after marriage was filled with happiness. However, even I have things that can make me feel down. It's the fact that I've suffered from severe menstrual cramps since I was a student. At first, I was using relatively mild over-the-counter painkillers, but my body got used to taking the medication, and it became difficult to go about my daily life without stronger drugs. When we first started dating, Jacob would change his plans to accommodate my period, and he would rub my back when I was in pain and complaining. I thought this would continue even after we got married. But I was wrong. My monthly periods. Jacob was just sighing all the time, watching me struggle to do housework without taking medication. Damn! It's not like it just started happening in the past few years. Get used to it already. He began to say that to me. We both work, but Jacob makes more money and contributes more to our living expenses. The amount is significant. I can't support both of us on my own earnings, so I put a lot of effort into doing housework. During my period, I would finish my chores while the painkillers were effective, rest my body on the sofa for a while, and then resume my housework. I do everything in order, but to Jacob, it seems like all he can see is me lying around on the sofa. No matter how much housework I do, there's never a single word of sympathy from Jacob. Then one day, we bought a new house. We had been living together in an apartment until then, but we bought a larger house so we could have a child someday. Jacob's parents are very sociable people who occasionally invite relatives for parties. Jacob must have thought this was a great opportunity to show off our new house, because he said we should invite the relatives to our house for the next party. Jacob, who has incredible initiative once he makes a decision, quickly contacted everyone with the date and time of the party, and immediately handed me a list of relatives who would be coming on the day. The list contained not only names but also ages, and detailed information about their food dislikes. I couldn't believe it when Jacob said to me in a grouchy tone that I should cater to everyone's tastes and he wouldn't forgive me if I bought ready-made food. The dislikes varied widely, and someone's favorite food was someone else's disliked food, so planning the menu was a struggle. After spending a few sleepless nights planning the menu, my period, which had been a little late, started. I took a painkiller, finished cleaning the room the day before, and decorated the room with flowers. I put out air fresheners and reviewed the flow of the next day's party in my head over and over again. And in the evening, I finished preparing for the next day's menu and went to bed. Jacob was laughing loudly at the TV while enjoying his nightly drink when I was trying to finish the preparation taking painkillers. I remembered Jacob like that as I fell asleep in bed. Then, on the morning of the day, I woke up before Jacob, made breakfast, and while tidying up, I started cooking for the party. I kept moving my hands, staring at the clock over and over again. I arranged the finished dishes on the table and thoroughly checked the entrance, living room, and toilet. The effect of the painkiller was beginning to wear off, and I was gradually unable to bear the increasing pain. I sat down on the sofa. I wanted to just lie down on the sofa, but I had managed to do my hair and makeup well, and I didn't know when the relatives would arrive, so I just sat down. I turned my gaze to Jacob and saw him watching TV with a glass of liquor in his hand. Even though we have to greet all the relatives soon, he's already started drinking. I was about to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. Maybe he noticed my gaze, because Jacob turned and glared at me. "What's up? Are you trying to tell me not to drink this early?" "No, not really." "Oomph. I get nervous too, you know. Besides, you're sitting there on the sofa so casually, you must be done preparing, right?" Jacob put down his glass on the table and started walking towards me. His gaze made me feel strangely nervous, and I had a bad feeling about it. "It's getting ready, but my period started. I've taken painkillers, but they seem to be wearing off, so I'm taking a little break. I'll get better soon." At my words, Jacob sighed heavily and glared at me. "Don't play the victim because of a little stomachache. My mom never did such a thing." Just after he said that, I thought Jacob was circling behind me when suddenly I was kicked in the back and fell from the sofa to the floor. By the time I understood in my head that I had been kicked in the back, I was already on the floor. It seemed to take a long time to realize what had happened. Ignoring me, Jacob flopped down on the sofa and unbelievably began playing a game on his smartphone. I had no idea what was going on or what the situation was. But I knew one thing: Jacob was enjoying his game, laughing without a single word of apology. As I tried to get up and leave, Jacob suddenly fell to the floor. I quickly looked up to see why Jacob had fallen, and there was Jacob's father, my father-in-law, standing behind the sofa. My father-in-law looked quite angry, and I couldn't look away from him. "What's going on?" Jacob, not understanding the situation, seemed flustered as he checked the sofa. "Oh, Dad. Did you just push me?" While picking up his phone that fell on the floor with him, Jacob asked my father-in-law. "I didn't just push you, I shoved you." "Huh? Why would you?" "Hey, are you serious? What do you think you're doing, kicking someone in the back? Especially Jacob, she's your wife." Jacob seemed a little taken aback by my father-in-law's anger. "Well, you know, I was drinking and got a bit carried away." He tried to reply, but my father-in-law must have glared at him for trying to brush it off with such an excuse. "Don't blame it on the alcohol. No matter what, a man should never hit a woman." "What do you mean, no matter what?" "It's just a form of discipline." "Discipline?" "Yeah." She was taking a break on the sofa without even finishing preparing. I was teaching her that if she doesn't work, she doesn't rest. It's part of discipline, right, Sally? I had no idea how to respond to his sudden question. I had properly finished preparing and was just trying to rest a little on the sofa. I had done my duty, so maybe I should just tell the truth here. Seeing my dilemma, my father-in-law turned his gaze to me. "Sally, is what Jacob's saying true?" I found myself unable to respond to my father-in-law's question. If I told the truth now, with family soon arriving, Jacob might get mad and become sulky. That would be unfair to the relatives who had kindly gathered to see our new home. I was trying to adjust to Jacob's words when my father-in-law addressed me. "Sally, your silence speaks volumes, doesn't it?" "Sorry?" Confused by his words, I asked him to explain. "If Jacob was telling the truth, you could have confirmed it instantly. But you remained silent. Does that mean there's something, or everything, wrong in his account?" I felt like he had seen through me. I opened my mouth to tell the truth. Everything's prepared. All that's left is to welcome the guests. It's just that I'm not feeling well today. Ah? You're just on your period. Jacob abruptly cut in. I felt like crying at his lack of delicacy. I had carefully chosen my words to avoid such an explicit topic in front of my father-in-law, and yet. Stop using your period as an excuse to not feel well. If you finished the preparations, just say so. I thought you were sitting on the sofa just to slack off because you hadn't finished. That was Jacob's idea of the situation. He didn't even remember me saying earlier that the preparations were almost done. He hadn't noticed my hard work from the early morning, no, from yesterday, the preparations and the cooking. He hadn't noticed me taking pills to bear the pain and continue working. He had decided we would hold the gathering here and did nothing to help with the preparations or the cooking. And I did all of it, alone. Slowly, anger began to build within me. Listen to me. She's always been talking about how severe her menstrual cramps are, but she still can't get used to the pain. Every month when her period comes, this is what happens. Dad, my mom wasn't like this, right? It seems I made the right decision coming over early to help Sally, since you, an inconsiderate host, decided to put on this gathering. What? Inconsiderate? Me? Not Sally? That's you, Jacob. If you decided to host this here and cooperated with Sally, you would have known how hard she worked on the preparations, how much pain she's in. And instead, what did you do? Did you start drinking before everyone arrives? The one who was slacking off was you, Jacob. At my father-in-law's outburst, Jacob seemed to physically shrink back. I didn't want Jacob to regret this the way I do. I've tried to educate you with that in mind, but... My father-in-law pulled up a dining chair and sat down, heaving a deep sigh. Your mother, too, she suffered from severe menstrual cramps, like Sally. I, as a man, with absolutely no knowledge about menstruation, and it wasn't a time when information was as readily available as now. And my mother used to say that your mother, who couldn't manage her own body, was a spoiled brat. Back then, I thought menstruation was something only people who couldn't manage themselves suffered from. My father-in-law spoke slowly. As if reminiscing about the past, my father-in-law was speaking, his gaze fixed on some distant point. Back then, painkillers were just for a peace of mind, and your mother, being a full-time housewife, was told by my mother to do all the household chores. No matter how much menstrual pain she was in, I couldn't let her rest. Then one day, your mother fainted. I immediately took her to the hospital, and the doctor told us the cause was endometriosis. Because of that, the dream your mother had of giving you siblings, it became impossible. Jacob was listening and staring at my father-in-law's face. Each person's body is different, and not everyone will have the same experiences. But if you ignore severe menstrual pain, it can lead to illness. Your mother did get sick. She was dealing with household chores, raising children, caring for her in-laws, and living with an inconsiderate husband. She had many sources of stress. She ended up infertile and couldn't get pregnant as she had hoped. I blamed it on the times and blamed my mother. But I was wrong. It was my responsibility to understand. It's a pain that we men can't experience, so I should have properly listened to your mother and accepted her as she was. I failed to do that. It was my fault. I regret not challenging my mother's views and remaining ignorant even now. My father-in-law spoke in such a somber tone, gently supported by my mother-in-law. I was only able to nod to my mother-in-law, who just appeared having a sad smile on her face. You did your best to understand me, didn't you? Despite your demanding job, you even helped out with household chores. And to think that you cut ties with your own parents for me. My mother-in-law looked at my father-in-law with kind eyes. Of course I did. I didn't want to burden you any more than I already had. I wanted the three of us to live happily. So, that's why I did what I did. But, cutting ties with my parents was a big decision. I wanted to avoid having to make such big decisions. That's why I've always tried to teach you, Jacob, hoping that you wouldn't make the same mistakes as I did. But it seems that I wasn't able to convey that to you at all." Unable to bear the heavy atmosphere, Jacob interjected with a conspicuously upbeat tone. "Hey, don't you think you're being a bit too dramatic, Dad? In my memory, sure, there were times when Mom was really unwell and had to lie down, but I don't remember her ever having to lay down because of something as minor as her period. Is this some kind of nostalgia bias? Are you maybe just assuming it was harder than it really was?" My mother-in-law's hand, which was resting on my father-in-law's shoulder, quivered slightly. With a gentle pat on her hand, my father-in-law shot Jacob a stern look. "You just forgot." Of course, as a mother, they'd want to their child from worrying. She tried her best not to let you see. But if it were just a matter of gritting your teeth and bearing it, it wouldn't be a disease. Your mother did have to lay down because she was suffering from period pain. I remember you coming home from school and saying that she was asleep again. I remember having a frank discussion with you about it. She wasn't just skipping out on responsibilities, she had no choice but to lay down because she was unwell. It seems you didn't even notice that. You weren't looking at Sally, and you weren't looking at your mother either." Upon hearing Jacob's, no, their son's words, my father-in-law was visibly disheartened. I was at a loss for words, unsure of what to say or whether it was even appropriate to interrupt the tension. Just then, someone knocked at the door. Looking at the clock, it was 5 minutes before the time we had agreed upon, and as I clutched my aching stomach, I hastily answered someone. As expected, it was a relative. I quickly replied and dashed to the front door. Upon opening the door, all of our relatives were there, holding a bouquet of flowers arranged as a housewarming gift. I thanked them, laid out guest slippers for them, and led them politely into the living room. When all the relatives entered the living room, the atmosphere was still tense between Jacob and my in-laws. The relatives exchanged glances with each other. "What's going on here?" one of the relatives asked my father-in-law. "Thanks for coming to Jacob's housewarming party. We were just in the middle of a little argument, so I apologize for the tense atmosphere." What? Does arguing always result in such a mess of the sofas and cushions?" "Well, Jacob here thought Sally was just slacking off when she was actually resting on the sofa because she wasn't feeling well. He pushed her off the sofa, so I was scolding him." At my father-in-law's words, all the relatives' faces turned to disbelief, and a younger-looking woman among them came over to me. "Are you okay? You must be tired from all the preparations." When asked, I shook my head a few times. "No, it's just that. I'm having really bad menstrual cramps." "Just? What are you saying? Even workplaces have menstrual leave, you know? I've used it myself. The intensity varies from person to person, but if it's really bad, you can apply for leave at work. What does it mean that you can't rest at home?" She said this and turned her face towards Jacob with momentum. What is it?" Intimidated, Jacob was met with cold stares from both his parents and all the relatives. Unable to stand their gaze, Jacob dashed from the room to his own room. Even though Jacob was gone, neither his parents nor any of the relatives went after him. It seems the relatives were aware of my mother-in-law's condition, and even the men showed understanding, which was a relief. Immediately, my father-in-law and my mother-in-law came to me and apologized over and over for their inadequate son, while the relatives admired the newly built house and praised the home-cooked meal I had prepared. There wasn't a single person who blamed me. Everyone was moved by the meal I had served, and I received a lot of praise. In addition to feeling a bit happy, the effect of the painkillers started kicking in and I enjoyed participating in the gathering. After a while, I received an email from Jacob. It said he was frustrated that he couldn't enjoy this event because of me, and how unfair it was that he was the one in the doghouse with the family, with no one on his side. The fact that he chose to email rather than talking upset me. As I was pondering what to reply, my mother-in-law peeked at my smartphone. Upon seeing the contents of the message, my mother-in-law stood up immediately. My father-in-law, seeing this, asked her what's going on, and my mother-in-law snatched the smartphone from me and handed it to him. As my father-in-law read the message, he also stood up abruptly. He still doesn't understand anything. We need to take him back and retrain him from scratch. It was an unexpected turn of events, but my in-laws seemed serious. Soon, the relatives also started saying that they should retrain him, and it seemed like they were completely on board with the idea. After a while, as the relatives left one after another, my mother-in-law headed to Jacob's room and dragged him out. Both his parents gripped his arms, and before he could protest, they took him away. About a week after Jacob was taken back to his parents' house, I received an email from him. He told me how my mother-in-law had been relentlessly teaching him about women's bodies, the struggles of menstrual pain, and that she even made him do housework while being taught by my father-in-law, assuming as if she was suffering from menstrual pain. He complained about how hard it was to balance work and housework. I couldn't help but chuckle reading his complaints. It seems like they've been retraining him from scratch, just as they told me. I thought maybe now he's starting to understand a bit of what I was feeling, and it made me smile. In the meantime, I am taking the time to confront my period pain anew. Encouraged by my female relatives who suggested seeing a gynecologist for my severe menstrual pain, I visited a clinic in his absence. The doctor advised me about medications and lifestyle changes, which was helpful. Above all, living a life without Jacob interfering was more comfortable than I had imagined. I could live at my own pace and even lie down on the sofa when I felt tired. It was a life where I could take care of my body. I found myself wishing I could live like this for a bit longer. One of the reasons was my mother-in-law's advice, but mainly because I wanted to enjoy this relaxed life, I didn't reply to any of Jacob's emails. A few weeks later, he returned to our home with my in-laws. My in-laws sat Jacob down at the dining table and pulled out a business card. It was a contact number of a lawyer, and I was shocked, thinking we were getting divorced right here and now. I was slightly overwhelmed, but my father-in-law spoke up quietly. "Sally, if he ever behaves in an unacceptable manner towards you again, feel free to contact this person for divorce." The look in my father-in-law's eyes was serious, and so was Jacob's. During the time we were apart, it seems Jacob had quite a serious talk with my in-laws and promised to change his behavior. Since then, Jacob has kept his promise without breaking it, no longer acting arrogantly, and even willingly doing the housework, especially when I'm having a hard time with my period. His comments belittling my period and its pain have also gradually disappeared. Finally, I was able to settle into a calm life with Jacob, which was a great relief for me. From now on, I plan to live sensibly, taking good care of my body and maintaining my health.